Hi, this is Dan from Legends from the Fireside. You're listening to Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 3. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here you will find the unpredictability of old-school paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and none will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tail of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time on Tale of the Manticore. In Chapter 4, Achillea, Cord, and Robin begin their quest in earnest. They set off, headed north, in search of a person named Audok. Their first encounter is mercifully harmless. A bold raccoon tries to steal their food at night, but Cord, who doesn't sleep, spots it, and the PCs easily shoo it away. Their next encounter is less straightforward. The very next day, the trio run into a solitary human. He's filthy and appears not to have eaten in some time. Achillea shares a bit of food with him, and the two decide to make camp together as night is falling. In the morning, Achillea asks the man, whose name is Ido, if he knows anyone by the name of Audok. Incredibly, he says he does. Near the end of the last episode, I recognized a good opportunity to use my current mythic event meaning, create the intellectual, to guide the story along. Ido has no idea who Audok is. The lie, he believes, is justified by his need. At the moment, he needs Achillea and her companions, not just for food, but for the safety of their numbers. Achillea, for her part, is guileless and not used to dishonesty. She's no fool, but her inexperience makes her gullible, and she takes Ido at his word. After all, he's telling her precisely the thing she wants to hear. Before returning to the narrative, I need to roll up a new event meaning to put in the hopper. Let's see, what do 78 and 43 give me? Okay, it's Cruelty Competition. No immediate use for this, but that's no problem. It gets set aside until it's needed. Since I have the action paused, I should take this chance to make my rolls for tomorrow's hex crawl. Here's a d20 for the weather. A 15, a beautiful day for traveling. Stumble upon? Well, I'll be damned. I've got a 1. That means something bad's going to happen, and I already know what it's going to be. Here's a hint. I'm not going to need a wandering encounter roll for the day. Chapter 5, Part 1, Day 4, Mid-afternoon. Mythic event meaning, Cruelty Competition. Party status, Achillea, 4 out of 4 hit points. Ido, 4 out of 4 hit points. Supplies. The companions have 4 portions of food and 6 portions of water remaining. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Shrink. Ido's limited charm was beginning to wear thin. The man huffed and complained peevishly about minor discomforts, even though the weather was fine and the going was easy. He also kept looking back over his shoulder, which made Achillea nervous too. Furthermore, Ido talked too much, and he smelled bad. But he had offered to take her north to see Audok, and Achillea would have put up with much worse for such help as he was able to offer. The quartet entered a lightly wooded area that eventually grew dense with thickly clustered oak and boxwood trees. Ido stole another glimpse behind them, and Achillea's patience broke.
Would you stop looking over your shoulder every 20 minutes? You jump at shadows, Ido. What are you so worried about anyway?
Ido bit his lip before answering.
You remember I said I had been traveling with someone? We, had a falling out of sorts.
What kind of...
Achillea did not own a bow, so it was not the sound of a drawn string that made her stop in her tracks, so much as the awareness that Ito, at her side, had ceased walking. When she looked at him, his eyes were wide, and he had a feral look on his face like a trapped animal. Achillea quickly scanned the tree line in the direction the sound had come, but the way the sunlight dappled and played in the foliage made it impossible to make out anyone hidden within the greenery. At that moment, a voice rang out. Although it came from somewhere directly in front of her, still she could not see its owner.
Whoever you are, we have 3 arrows trained on your party, but we only want the man who wronged us. You can walk away. It's not your lives that we've come for.
You said you were traveling with someone.
Achillea hissed at Ito.
Did I say that?
Stammered the other in a whisper.
How do we know there are 3 of you?
Achillea suddenly found herself calling into the woods. She could feel Robin tensing on her head, about to spring off and fly away. A sudden movement at this moment would not be good, she thought. The reply came after a momentary delay.
Ask your new friend. He can tell you,
came the disembodied voice. Achillea stared at Ito.
Well?
He looked at her out of the corners of his eyes and nodded guiltily. Achillea felt a flush of anger at Ito for having misled her.
What will you do with this man if we walk away and leave him to you?
Another pause from the forest. Then,
his life is forfeit. Choose quickly now. I can't hold back this bowstring forever.
Dramatis Personae. Ito. 2 days ago. It was absolutely unfair because it wasn't his fault. Not really. An accident did happen, after all. This is what Ito told himself while he stopped to catch his breath, hiding within the brambles of a particularly inhospitable thorn bush. He'd been on the run, stopping periodically, for hours. Earlier that morning, he'd woken up to the noise of his 3 fellow outlaws retching a little ways off from their campsite. As Ito was the only one who was not ill, it did not take long for his companions to draw the same conclusion. The mushrooms he had gathered as part of their meal the night before must have been poisonous. Ito had tried to protest, saying that he had eaten them as well, and just as many, but they had not believed him. Perhaps the mistrust was due to his joining their group last. He had always been on the outs with them. Ito suspected that they also blamed him for the failure of their last caper. When the vomiting stopped, the accusations began. There was yelling, insults hurled in both directions, and then the knives came out. He had run for his life, and they had pursued. By the hate-filled look on his former allies' waxy and pale faces, Ito did not expect them to give up. He had to keep going. His throat was still raw, and his heart yet beat a rapid tattoo in his chest, but there was nothing for it. If he didn't keep moving, they would catch him. And while he had nothing to defend himself with, not even a dagger, they had knives, swords, and bows. Chapter 5, Part 2, Day 4, Mid-afternoon. Mythic event meaning. Cruelty Competition. Party status. Achillea, 4 out of 4 hit points. Ito, 4 out of 4 hit points. Supplies. The companions have 4 portions of food and 6 portions of water remaining. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Shrink. Achillea's mind raced through the limited options. They could flee or fight, or she and Cord could walk away. If they fled, they all might well get away. These woods were thick and would provide plenty of cover. Fighting would be foolish. Ito was unarmed, she had no combat skill, and Cord couldn't take on 3 humans alone. The third option was also problematic. To surrender Ito, despite the questionable morality of such a course, would result in her losing her best chance to finding Audok. It was possible that Audok was very famous. That would explain how Ito knew of him, and would suggest that others could help in the future. But what if she had stumbled across the exact person she needed? Maybe fate was screaming in her ear. Was she being deaf to it? She flicked her eyes at Cord and saw that he was waiting on her decision. She felt oddly alone and suddenly wished she were back at home. But there was no one to make choices for her there either. It was up to her. Earlier in the episode, I rolled a natural 1 on my stumble upon roll, one of the rolls I make each day to prepare for a hex crawl. A natural 1 indicates that something really bad will happen, something life-threatening. It took me no time to decide what that would be. Ito's ex-partners, also outlaws, had been tracking them and have managed to overtake them and set up an ambush. Ito had mentioned that he'd fallen out with his previous companions, and that part was true, but he was vague about their number. Achillea's party is in a lot of trouble because there are 3 outlaws hidden in the forest, pointing arrows at them. Achillea, Cord, and Ito can't really make an effective attack because they can't see the enemy. Ultimately, they can run or they can surrender. Achillea is fairly naive, but even she doesn't really believe that Ito's old allies will just let them go. At best, they would steal her food and other valuables, maybe even her spellbook. That would be disastrous, so it would seem that flight is the best of the 3 bad options. The danger of the natural 1 stumble upon is not just in that this encounter happens. The penalty is really expressed in the current no-win situation, where even the best option puts every one of them in mortal danger. Achillea didn't say anything. She didn't yell out for her companions to run or give any indication by her posture or orientation to suggest her intentions. She simply dashed off to the left, ducking low and hoping desperately that Cord would follow and that the archers would be taken by surprise by her sudden flight. Her keen ears picked up multiple twangs as bowstrings were released. Then she heard the crashing sound of Cord and Ito as they fell in right behind her. She sprinted, jagging left and right, deliberately choosing the thickest oaks to put between herself and the archers.
Entering combat.
Achillea runs as fast as she can through the woods, hoping the trees will provide good cover against enemy bowfire. They will, but not before the archers get to loose a volley of arrows. Because the PCs have so few hit points, each one of them will face death here. Even Cord, who I've decided will have 6 hit points, could be killed outright. It's time to make some rolls. Ito has an armor class of 10. Achillea has a dexterity bonus which gives her an AC of 11, and Cord, because he's made of wood, has an AC of, I'll say 14. Robin is not a target. The archers will each take a -2 penalty because, even at close range, the woods do provide some cover. The first arrow is meant for Ito. A 12 or better on a D20 hits. The roll. A 17 hits. Damage will be 4 points. That's it for him. Ito has been shot in the back and killed. Not what I'd call a good start. Cord is next. The archer firing at him will need to roll a 16 or better. Here goes. A 14 is a good roll, but not good enough. The arrow zips harmlessly past Cord's shoulder. Now for the roll I'm dreading. I've already bonded with Achillea and would hate to lose her here. The arrow speeding towards Achillea needs a 13 or better to hit. A 10. Phew. The young half-elf and her friend hear their new companion go down, but there's no helping that. They need to save their own skins, and do not even break stride as they bolt through the forest, arms and legs pumping madly. At this point, combat is over, at least for now. I'm going to make a reaction roll to see if the outlaws will want to pursue. I think, since they got what they wanted, that they probably will not, but they might. I'll add a +2 to the roll given the circumstances. On 2d6, higher is better. A 10 on the dice. Yeah, even with that bonus, Ito's former companions will not give chase. They were out for revenge, and I guess they got satisfaction. Chapter 5, Part 3, Day 4, Late Afternoon. Mythic Event Meaning, Cruelty Competition. Party Status: Achillea, 4 out of 4 hit points. Cord, 6 out of 6 hit points. Supplies. The companions have 4 portions of food and 6 portions of water remaining. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Shrink. Achillea ran and ran and ran until her throat and lungs burned and her heart felt like it would burst. She had no idea which direction she was headed. She only wanted to put as much distance between her and Cord and the archers while keeping to the woods as much as possible. As a result, when Achillea could go no further and they were finally forced to stop, she had no idea where they were. The half-elf bent over double with her hands on her knees, sucking wind. It took some time before she could manage a word.
Do you think...
She didn't really need to finish her sentence. Cord could just about read her mind after so many years of companionship. He knew that she was wondering if Ito had been killed. He bowed in his way of nodding.
Maybe he isn't, though. Maybe we should go back.
Neither of them had ever seen someone be killed before. Technically, they still hadn't. But despite her words, Achillea was pretty sure that they had heard Ito die. Cord twisted his body back and forth, meaning, no, they should not go back, and Achillea did not argue about it further. She felt strangely exhilarated by having been so close to death herself, but she was equally frustrated. Her best chance of finding Audok was gone. Suddenly, she pinched her eyes shut and let out a moan. How could she have been so stupid? Ito had never known about Audok. That had been a lie, just like the number of his companions had been a lie. Of course, all he had wanted from her was her food and the improved safety of their company. She shook her head, angry with herself, and bunched her little hands into fists. She would have to be more careful, less trusting, in future. She opened her eyes.
Cord, I'm a fool.
The bland, slightly smiling face of her companion looked back. Just then, a fluttering of wings and a peep from a nearby boxwood told Achillea that Robin had found them. At least that was good news.
Come, Robin.
The stuffed bird winged down from the branch to settle once again on top of her head.
I'm glad you found us. I don't know what we would have done if we'd lost you.
A trill came in reply, and she felt the hard little bird feet on her scalp as they gripped her hair.
All right, let's keep going.
Between the lines. You know, I think I'm going to need to start a map. We can begin with this story's starting point. This is a place called Willowvale. Aldvey chose to build his home here because of its remoteness, no doubt, but also because the valley had a river that, because of its steady current and fordable shallows, teemed with fish. Besides this, Willowvale is also a beautiful locale, with plenty of wildflowers, fruiting trees, and a pleasantly rolling landscape. To the north, where Achillea met Ito, is a place called Summer Hill. Summer Hill wasn't named for any unique features. It was just a name that Aldvey thought sounded well. Going further north, we leave the circle of protection that Aldvey's presence once provided. I'll call the woods where Achillea and her companions can currently be found the Finchwood, on account of the number of that type of bird living in its canopy. I think the Finchwood will end in an escarpment where the land sharply drops along a miles-long line running southwest to northeast. By the time Achillea's party reaches this feature of the landscape, the sun will be low in the sky, and trouble will be miles behind them. Chapter 5, Part 4, Day 4, Sunset, Mythic Event Meaning, Cruelty Competition, Party Status, Achillea, 4 out of 4 hit points. Supplies. The companions have 3 portions of food and 5 portions of water remaining. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Shrink. The low sun made the trees cast long shadows as Achillea, Cord, and Robin emerged from the Finchwood and found themselves looking down from the lip of an escarpment that ran away to their left and right as far as the eye could see. Below was a grassy plain whose surface rippled and dimpled in the light wind, revealing a secret legion of pink clover blossoms. Achillea felt more settled than she had before. It had taken her all day to stop shaking, and she still had the impulse to look back over her shoulder. It was mad to think that the people who had tried to kill her would have pursued her this far, but she could not fully banish the notion. She decided to stop for the night here, where there was plenty of cover, and she was at a good vantage for at least the terrain in front of them, if not behind. Once again, she did not wish to risk a fire, but there was no need for one. She still had a few days' worth of dried provisions, and the summer evening, with its chirping crickets and katydids, was warm and comfortable. She and Cord found a thick tree to lean against, and sat in silence while twilight became night and the fireflies came out. She tried to control her breathing and meditate in the way Aldve had told her, to calm herself and truly think of nothing. This was a skill that had not come quickly or easily, but she had been practicing for years, and so even considering all the troubles she had recently faced, or perhaps because of them, she eventually found sleep. It's time to make the rolls for the next day's hex crawl. The first roll will be for weather, on a d20. A 14 means the mild weather continues. Stumble upon? I hope we don't see another 1 here. That roll has already cost me a potential player character. Here goes. 11. That means nothing exceptional will happen or be discovered. Of course, that doesn't preclude the chance for a wandering encounter. A 4 to 6 on a d6 indicates there will be one. The roll. I've got a 1. I don't think it would make for a particularly gripping audio drama to narrate a day's worth of travel through pleasant weather in which nothing is encountered. So I'll just update my map and... I seem to have forgotten how many miles a person can walk in a day in D&D. Hang on, I'll check the internet. Okay, I'm back and it seems like the official number is 18 miles in a day. This seemed like a lot, so I did a bit of research on what real-life hikers can do, and I found answers ranging from 8 to 16. I'm going to say that Achillea, who is young and fit but not an experienced long-distance hiker, can go 12 miles a day on average through this mixed terrain. I'm going to mark off a day's worth of supplies from Achillea's character sheet, and then I think it'll be time for new dice rolls. For weather, an 8. That's maybe a little gusty, making the walk a bit more fatiguing, but nothing special. Stumble upon. Oh, a 19. My d20 is teasing me, but nothing is stumbled upon on day 5. I'll adjust food and water supplies down by 1 each, and finally, is there any wandering encounter? The roll. A 6. That's a bingo. I'm first going to make a few light additions to my bespoke wandering encounter table. The most important one is to replace human outlaws with something else. I'm going to substitute human travelers there, just so we don't get a repeat result. Rolling on the new table. A 4. What's that? Oh dear, that's not very good. A quick high-low roll to see when the encounter takes place. Night. Yeah, that makes sense. 1 more pair of rolls to check for surprise. For the PCs. A 6. For the wandering encounter. A 1. The dice gods like to tease me, but I think they might just be rooting for Achillea, because that is a stroke of good luck. Here's how all those dice rolls play out in the narrative. Chapter 5. Part 5. Day 5. Night. Mythic event meaning. Cruelty Competition. Party status. Achillea. 4 out of 4 hit points. Supplies. The companions have 2 portions of food and 4 portions of water remaining. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Shrink. The sky had not been so overcast that Achillea and her companions could not see the stars, and they had taken their bearings before going to sleep. The escarpment that marked the edge of the Finchwood was now 24 miles to her back. The terrain had been flat for a day, and then began to rise and fall. She had felt somewhat exposed as they made their way through the tall grasses, though conversely, there was a comfort knowing she could see for long distances in all directions, especially behind them. They had made a cold camp right there in the grass that night, looking up at the stars and wondering what the next day would bring. It turned out that overcast skies and gusty winds were in store, and the going on the next day was a little harder. Eventually, the plain gave way to a mixed forest of white cedar, broadleaf, and ash. Camp that night was in the naturally hollowed-out bole of a large sequoia. It was spacious enough for all 3 of them, and Achillea was even considering making a small fire to warm them when a sound pierced the noises of the chirping dusk insects. The sound was not familiar to Achillea, who had never heard or seen a whip before. There it was again, this time accompanied by the unmistakable sound of laughter. Whoever owned that laugh, Achillea did not want to meet them. It sounded somehow cruel. Making a fire was now off the table, and Achillea only hoped to pass the night without being molested. Was that the sound of someone in pain? Common sense told her not to investigate, and she would not have if it hadn't been for the next time the sound came. Because there could be no mistake. That voice was speaking in Elvish. Thanks so much for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help to support it, there are lots of ways to do so. You can recommend the show online or to friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can pick up One Shot in the Dark, the Pendulum World Building Tool, or Encyclopedia Manticorica on DriveThruRPG. You can purchase a Tale of the Manticore t-shirt at www.beararts.store. And finally, you can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. I am grateful for all of your kind support. As you know, I enjoy sharing a listener review at the end of each episode. This one was left by Displaced Hoosier. Displaced Hoosier writes, "We are absolutely obsessed with this podcast, both seasons 1 and 2. John does such an excellent job weaving dark narrative, absolutely terrifying details, and fantastic character development. We feel nothing but gratitude to listen to this podcast every week." Likewise, Displaced Hoosier. It's all gratitude here. I feel extremely fortunate to have listeners who are so supportive. Thank you very, very much. I have 3 voice actors on the show today. Chas from Rollbound is back, playing Ido once again. In the role of the ambushing outlaw is newcomer Tom Masters. Tom did a great job in this role, and has asked me to let the world know that he is available for other voice work. Contact him at tmasters2395@gmail.com. Finally, who's that person speaking Elvish off to one side at the end of the episode? Returning Season 2 favorite, Kyellen, is back on the show in a new role, but since we haven't met this character just yet, I'll leave it as mystery voice for now. Thanks very much, Chas, Tom, and Kyellen. For those curious to learn a bit more about Tale of the Manticore, I keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff, like art, maps, tables, crafts, and show notes. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. To get in touch with me, try @ManticoreTale on X, Tale of the Manticore Podcast on Instagram, or taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore. It's the story where chaos rolls.